Chapter 9, the instruments of trade policy. So, until Chapter 7, Chapter 8, we studied theory of international trade. This theory part finished. So, from Chapter 9, we studied policy part of international trade lecture. Okay? And Chapter 9 is the instruments of trade policy, the tools of trade policy. In that sense, Chapter 9 is most important in policy part of international trade lecture. Okay? And structure of Chapter 9 is like this. Section 1, partial equilibrium analysis of tariff in a single industry. Anyway, the tariff is most important instrument of trade policy to protect or protect industry or introduction of international trade means liberalization means reduction in tariff, right? Protection of trade means imposing tariff. Anyway, tariff is number one instrument of trade policy. And Section 2, costs and benefit of trade, tariff. And Section 3, export subsidies. Export subsidies is number 2 instrument of trade policy. Introduction of export subsidies means protection of some industry like agriculture, right? And number 3 instruments of trade policy is import quotas. Import quotas. Quantity restrictions in import to protect in competitive domestic agricultural farmers, for example, right? So import quota is also very important. And next section studies voluntary export restraints. We simply talking VER. Actually, voluntary export restraint is almost same to import quota. Only one difference is the subject of imposing this kind of some protectionist measure. Import quota case, import quota is activated by some country or government of some incompetitive sectors. Okay? But BER is just same to import quota, but for example, Korea has comparative disadvantage in agriculture, in beef, for example, right? And import quota means Korean government introduced import quota, maximum importation of beef to some 1,000 tons, for example. That is import quota. BER means Korean governments ask Australia or US governments to voluntarily restrain your exports of beef to Korean market to 10 or 100 tons, for example. That is BER. So in contents, almost same. Okay? And local content requirements. I'd like to explain later. Okay? Slide number 4, types of tariff. A tariff is tax imposed when a good is imported, right? That is definition of tariff. There are 2 types of tariff. Number 1, a specific tariff. This one imposed as a fixed charge for each unit of imported goods. For example, $3 per barrel of oil, $10 per 1 kilogram of beef, for example, like this. That is a specific tariff. And an ad valorem tariff is imposed as a fraction of the value of imported goods. For example, 25% tariff on the value of imported trucks. Okay? So ad valorem tariff is based on the value of imports, right? And specific tariff is something dollar, $35 per 1 unit of imports. Okay? Next slide. consider how a tariff affects a single market, say that of wheat. Suppose that, okay, I'd like to use a whiteboard, full, right? I'd like to explain impact of tariff like this, using some graphical illustration of the impact of tax, okay? So our assumption is perfectly same to some settings in Hexagon model or Ricardi model. The world consists of home and foreign. Home Korea has comparative advantage in Q1, manufacturing good, and comparative disadvantage in Q2, for example, agricultural good, right? And foreign is Australia. Australia has comparative advantage in Q2, agricultural good, and disadvantage in Q1, manufacturing good, like this. So now Korean government introduced tariff. So tariff imposed on comparative disadvantaged sector, right? To support domestic agricultural farmers. So this case is Q2 case, right? Q2 case, agricultural goods case. Home, Korea, foreign, Australia, and world market. Now there are three graphs, right? Zero, and that is demand and supply, domestic demand and supply, right? Quantity of demand, quantity of supply in Australia, like this, and price, world price, and that is, for example, Australian price, P star, and price in domestic price, like this, right? And we know in Q2 market, Korea has comparative disadvantage, right? Before trade, otake price. In other words, otake price in Korea is higher than otake price in Australia, isn't it? So we import agricultural goods, right? So domestic demand and supply is, for example, like this, okay? So otake price is this one, where domestic demand is equal to domestic supply. That is, we said PA, like this, right? Otake price. And Australia is comparative advantage in this one. So featured by lower otake price. That means that is Australian demand. Australian demand, right? Supply is, for example, like this. That is Australian supply. So Australian otake price is P star A, is like this. From here, we know that Korea has comparative disadvantage in agricultural good, and Australia has comparative advantage in Australian good, right? So then what happened after trade? What happened after trade? We import, right? We import Australian good, simply talking, right? So now we introduce import demand. Import demand, right? We import goods from Australia or from world market. So import demand by Korea is equal to demand supply. Demand minus supply. That is import demand in Korea, isn't it? Right? Import demand. Right? We import. Right? Import demand at world market is Korea's import demand at world market. Or from Australia is domestic demand minus supply. The gap between the two is import demand by Korea. Similarly, after trade, Australia export, right? Export this good. So export supply at world market by Australia is equal to domestic supply minus domestic demand, isn't it? Right? It's this one. So we can graph import demand here. Simply talking, import demand curve starting from here, PA, right? If after trade price is equal to otaki, domestic price, then no import happen. No reason to import, right? But world price is lower than domestic otaki price, we import from world market, right? So if price is here, then what happens? Price is here, then at this world price is here, then domestic production is smaller than domestic demand, right? The gap between the two is imported, this one imported. So this kind of thing. This one imported from world market. If price is here, then what happens? If world price is here, then domestic demand larger than domestic production. Right? The gap between the two should be imported from world market or from Australia, right? So the gap between the two, this one is this one, for example, right? Then if we connect this kind of form, we can graph import demand curve at world market, domestic market, and foreign market, right? It's like this. So we can graph import demand curve like this, okay? And also we can graph, illustrate export supply by Australia, right? If world price is PA, after trade price is equal to otaki price in Australia, then no reason to export from the perspective of Australian farmers. Okay? So should be export supply should be equal to 0. So export supply curve at world market starts from here, P star A. At this time, same, so 0. Okay? If world price is here, for example, right? World price is higher than otaki price. Then what happens? Domestic demand, this amount, right? And domestic supply is this one. The gap between the two, export is to world or Korea, right? So export supply at this price is this one. The gap of this one is equal to this one. Can you understand? Right? If world price is here, then what happens? At this price, the gap between the two should be exported to world. World supply at world market. Right? Export supply at world market is this one. This one should be equal to this one, for example. Then we connect all of this, we can get this kind of export supply by foreign. Can you understand? Right? That is happen. Then now we can define what is equilibrium price after trade. After trade price P star, PT in section 3 and 5. PT should be equal to, at that price, demand, quantity demanded should be equal to quantity supplied. Okay? Or at world market reaching at equilibrium at the price P, we said world price PW, where import demand by Korea is equal to export supplied by Australia. Can you understand? Right? Quantity of import demand should be equal to export supply at this price. That is PW, world price. World free trade price, PT. Right? But I said PW here. I notate PW. Can you understand? At this PW, right? In foreign supply greater than Australian consumers' demand. The gap between the two exported. Right? So we said that is export, we said QW. Right? Supplied by export supply. Right? Export supply. This one is equal to actually this one. Export supply at PW. Right? Export supply of Australia, export supply curve is this one. And price, world price PW, then quantity demanded at world market is this one, QW. QW. Right? Also now think about from the perspective of Korea. At this price is here, right? At PW. Then what happened in Korea? Domestic production of agricultural goods is this amount. But consumers demand larger amount of that. Right? This one is import demand at W. Right? This one is, so in this import demand, price is here. Import demand is QW. Okay? Two things are same. Import demand by Korea is equal to export supply by Australia when price is PW. Can you understand? Right? That is world price. So we explain using this kind of thing. Then, from now on, we studied the impact of tariff. Now, Korean government, right? So what happened after trade, compared to Otaki and world trade, domestic production decreased from here to here, right? So agricultural farmers, Korean agricultural farmers' production decreased because world price is lower than Otaki price, right? So Korean domestic consumers demand cheaper price, can access to cheaper price agricultural goods. So price down and domestic production decrease, right? So domestic agricultural farmers are losers of free trade. Okay, so government have an incentive to support these poor agricultural farmers, right? Government want to protect domestic agricultural farmers using tariff, right? So Korean government imposed tariff to protect domestic agricultural farmers. Can you understand? So now think about imposition of tariff by Korean government leads to domestic price rise, right? Because of tariff. Tariff is some added cost, simply talking, right? So domestic price increase, right? So after tariff price, I notate by PT, price after tariff. Okay? So for example, increase, domestic price increase, right? Then, for example, after tariff, that is PT. So new equilibrium price after imposition of tariff, that is PT, for example, like this. That is PT, right? Now we consume like this. Then what happened? The gap between the two decreased after imposition of tariff. Anyway, in import demanded the world market decrease, right? So that is this one. Okay? Price increase, then the gap between the two decrease. Import demand at world market decrease. The quantity is QT, right? This one should decrease to QT. Can you understand? Then, now, if world market restoring equilibrium, what should be done? Export supply also decrease to QT. Right? The equilibrium means quantity demanded, that is import demanded. Imported QT is equal to import demanded when price is PT, MDT. Right? Then export supply by foreign, Australia export supply by foreign should be equal to QT. Then world market reaching at equilibrium again after imposition of tariff by Korean government. Got it? quantity demanded should be equal to quantity supplied. Quantity demanded decreased to QW to QT. Right? Then export supply, it was QW originally, but this one also should be decreased. Right? Now think about export supply curve is this blue line. Right? And export supply should be equal to this one. Right? Is equal to QT. Export supply, this one should be equal to QT. Right? So this one, export supply curve, and this one is me. Then export supply is equal to import demand by home. Quantity of import demand by Korea should be equal to export supply by Australia. Then equilibrium again. Right? So we said that is PT star. Right? At this PT star, export supply by foreign is equal to QT. Right? So new equilibrium price in foreign is PT star. Can you understand? So, in other words, at this price, that is PT star. At this PT star, foreign's export supply decrease compared to BW, isn't it? Right? Price decrease. Right? Price decrease. Then what happened in foreign? Consumers demand, originally this one, when world price is PW, consumers demand is here. Now increase because world price decrease. What happened in domestic production in foreign? This one is this one, but now decrease at this price. Right? So export supply decreased by this one. Anyway, this one is equal to this one. Right? This one is equal to this one, isn't it? Right? And in Korea, after this PT, export supply, import demand is this one. This one is equal to this one. This one is equal to this one. Right? World market reaching an equilibrium when this one is equal to this one, or this one is equal to this one, is equal to QT. Can you understand? Then, now think about here. That is PT star. Right? That is PT star. Original price was PW. But after imposition of tariff, what happened? Domestic price goes up to PT. And foreign price, Australian price decreases PT star. Can you understand? The gap between the two is tariff rate. Right? So PT minus PT star is tariff. Or PT is equal to PT star plus tariff. Can you understand? So from here we know that Australian government didn't do anything. Only Korean government imposing tariff. Then domestic price, Korean price increased because of tariff, right? But foreign price also decreased. Right? Foreign price also decreased. So tariff shared by domestic price and foreign price simultaneously. Can you understand? That is important point. Australian government didn't adopt anything, right? Only Korean government imposed tariff. But to restore equilibrium, right? So import demand should be decreased, right? And export supply foreign also should be decreased to restore equilibrium at world market, right? Because of this, foreign price should decrease. Can you understand? That is impact of tariff. Can you understand this impact of tariff?